Hello St John's School and welcome back for another chapter of the Roman Mysteries. We are now on chapter 7 or scroll 7. Okay, the weeping man wiped his nose angrily on his arm and then bent down. He picked up a pine cone, drew back his arm and threw it at Scuto. It fell short and the man sobbed again. "Get away!" He began looking around for other missiles, but the three of them were already turned and were running back towards the road. Scuto looped behind them, still wagging his tail as if it were a game. "It's the man following us," gasped Flavia when they reached the road again. "No, I don't think so," said Jonathan. He was wheezing a bit. While she waited for him to catch his breath, Flavia joined Nubia in patting Scuto. "Don't worry, Scuto," she said in a soothing voice. "We won't let the bad man get you." "Not bad man," said Nubia. Flavia and Jonathan both looked up at her in surprise. "Sad man," said Nubia quietly. But that's probably the man who killed Bobbus," Jonathan cried. "You may be right," agreed Flavia. "But how can we be sure?" mused Jonathan. "I know," Flavia said after a moment's thought. "We'll all hide and wait for him to go back into the town. When he does, you follow him, Jonathan. Try to find out who he is and where he lives. Nubia and I will go back to the little tomb and look for clues there. Then we'll meet back at my house. All right?" "Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Let's wait beside the tomb in the shade." The three of them sat on a soft layer of dust and pine needles and rested their backs against the shady wall of a large, decrepit tomb. Fragrant dill and thyme bushes screened them from the road, but they could see anyone who came along. For a long time, no one passed. The only sound was the slow creaking of the cicadas and Scuto's steady, rhythmic panting. Flavia gazed at the tombs around them. They were like small houses with doors so that new urns could be added. Some had inscriptions above the doors. Others had pictures painted on their outer walls, like the two faded gladiators shown fighting on a tomb near the road. Flavia's own family had a tomb further down the road, for the Gemini family had now been in Ostia for 3 generations. She often went there with her father to honour her mother and tiny twin brothers. Half-buried amphoras marked the graves of poorer people. Wine could be poured into their necks to refresh the ashes of the dead below. Presently an old man leading a tiny donkey passed slowly down the road towards the town. He had loaded the little beast high with firewood. They could hear him singing snatches of a song and talking to himself. Then he was gone and the road was empty again. "I don't think he's coming this way," Flavia whispered to Jonathan at last, "unless we've missed him." "No, we haven't missed him. Wait here. I'll see if he's still at the tomb." He crept off, but a few minutes later he stood before them. "He's gone," said Jonathan, "but you must come and look at the tomb. Come quickly." "To the gods of the underworld," Flavia read, "sacred to the memory of my poor Avita, 8 years old." The three of them and Scuto stood before the little tomb while Flavia read out the Latin inscription painted over the tiny door. "There's a picture on this side," said Jonathan. They all moved round to the side of the tomb. Someone had painted a fresco of a little girl lying on a funeral couch surrounded by mourners. The colours looked strangely bright and cheerful. "Little girl," said Nubia sadly. "Yes," said Flavia softly. "Probably his daughter, but where did he go? The only way back is along the road." "Unless," said Jonathan, "unless his house backs onto the graveyard like ours." "But that would mean he'd live on our street," said Flavia. "I wonder how we could find out," mused Jonathan, nibbling a stalk of dried grass. "I know just the person to ask," cried Flavia. They stood in Flavia's kitchen, munching grapes and sipping cool water from ceramic cups. Scuto was drinking long and deeply from his water bowl. Alma bent over the kitchen hearth, stirring a pan of chicken barley soup and nodding her head. "Yes, I remember something about a little girl. Her father was a sailor. They lived just up our street. The father adored the girl, hated to be away from her. That's right, the girl's name was Avita Procula, and his name was Publius. Publius Avitus Proculus came back from a voyage a week or 2 ago to find she'd died." Alma reached up and took a pinch of rosemary from a dried bundle which hung from the ceiling. "She lived just up the road?" asked Jonathan. "Yes," said Alma. crumbling the herb into the soup. "The house right on the end." "How did Evita die?" asked Flavia. "Do you know?" "Oh my, yes," sighed Alma as she resumed stirring. "But I never mentioned it to you, dear. I didn't want to give you nightmares." They all looked at Alma. She stopped stirring for a moment and faced them gravely. She died horribly, in great pain of hydrophobia. And when they continued to stare at her blankly, she explained in a whisper, "A mad dog bit her." "Hydrophobia," said Mordecai, "is a terrible disease." He was leaning over the marble-top table in his study, examining medical scrolls. "The word hydrophobia means a fear of water. People suffering from hydrophobia are terrified of water, even of their own saliva." Jonathan, standing behind his father, allowed some spittle to bubble out of his mouth, looked down at it, and opened his eyes wide in mock horror. Flavia and Nubia tried not to giggle. Mordecai went on. "Victims also lose their appetite." Jonathan pretended to refuse an imaginary plate. "Suffer hallucinations." Jonathan opened his eyes wide again and screamed silently, brushing wildly at imaginary insects crawling on his arms. Flavia bit her lip to stop from laughing. Nubia covered her mouth with her hand. "And eventually become paralysed." Jonathan clapped his hands to his side, went stiff as a plank, and crossed his eyes. The girls, unable to contain themselves any longer, burst out laughing. Mordecai glanced up at them briefly. "Jonathan, please," he said without looking round. "It's not a laughing matter." He read on. "The disease is also known as rabies, which means a raging. Let's see what Pliny has to say. I have his new volume here somewhere." "Who is Pliny?" asked Flavia. "He's the admiral of the Roman fleet and a brilliant historian," said Mordecai as he shuffled through the scrolls on the table. "He's just written a superb natural history in 37 volumes. Lives just down the coast from here." "Ah." Jonathan's father held a scroll to the lamp, for it was nearly dusk and the light was fading quickly. "Yes, here's what Pliny says about rabies. Greatest danger of humans catching it when the dog star is shining. That's now. It causes fatal hydrophobia. To prevent a dog from catching this disease, mix chicken dung in its food." Jonathan screwed up his face and stuck his tongue out. Mordecai smiled indulgently at their laughter, then suddenly hissed at them to be quiet. They all heard a strangled cry and the sound of barking. "There, in the graveyard again," said Mordecai between clenched teeth. "But this time I'm ready." The doctor hurried out of the study and ran upstairs, almost tripping on his long robe. Jonathan, Flavia, and Nubia followed him into a narrow bedroom with one small window. Under the table, and next to them a bow and arrow. Mordecai pushed his head out, and they heard him grunt. "There they are." He reached for the bow and arrow and aimed it through the window. Jonathan and Flavia jostled to see, but the window was too small. Mordecai was blocking their view. "Quickly," cried Jonathan, "the other bedroom has a window. Follow me." And that is the end of that chapter. Join me again for another one soon. Bye.